One day removed from the end of the season in Indianapolis, Camille and I put together some final thoughts on Game 5, this Bucks season, and is it the end of this Bucks era of basketball? We dig into that coming up next.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen each and every day as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I would ordinarily say you can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network, Camille. Now we're going to be waiting until October for that once again as this Bucks season comes to an end last night in Indiana against the Pacers in Game 5 of this best of 7 series. We saw the fight from this Bucks group, but ultimately some costly turnovers down the stretch doom this team. We'll get into our thoughts on that as you had the unenviable task of a solo break this thing down and recap what you saw. So revisit some of the things that you had to say and some more thoughts that have come out as more and more has trickled out here one day after that season-ending loss by the Bucks. We should tell you today's episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox. No console needed. Head to amazon.com/Fire TV. Locked On to learn more. Well, it is in many ways a fitting way for the season to end. Camille, there was a lot of up and down play, inconsistencies from this group. And, you harken back to the 4-point play to the Pacers where you leave that game saying, how the hell did you lose that game on that type of play? And buddy, if you thought that was bad, just wait, an 8-0 run in a 40-second stretch. As we mentioned, you had to take this one on last night as our radio post game, including the network portion, was over 3 hours to get into everything that happened here. But I guess let's rip the Band-Aid off and revisit those last 40 seconds, shall we? What was the biggest turning point to you in that stretch?
I mean, you start with the turnovers, but I think that Doc pointed out, but that Nembhard 3, it's like a deep three. He was quite open to, like, it was deep, but
about
he was
the same spot pretty much that he hit that 3 against the Celtics last year.
Yeah. So it's like, he can do it, but it just, I do wonder too, like that 3 is what really sticks out to me. The turnovers, of course, but also just, I do wonder how the fatigue levels were hitting for the Bucks. And yes, the Pacers were also out there putting in some heavy minutes, but when you have a starting group where I think the lowest starter played like 44 minutes in this game, like it gets taxing on the body after a while. And I did wonder here I wonder how much fatigue had to play a part in this. And at first, when it was looking like the Bucks were going to win, I was like, oh, I wonder how they're going to be for Game 6. And I was like, oh, they get 2 nights off if they do make it to Game 6. So, go ahead, do what you got to do tonight, recoup, and then bounce back. But we didn't get that far, Justin. We didn't get that far. And I just keep seeing the 3. I see the first turnover where he's trapped. I see the second turnover where it just goes through his hands. I see the Giannis-Haliburton layup and one, which has now been deemed by the league as shouldn't have been a foul on AJ Green there for that last Haliburton layup. So just squandered opportunity. It feels like a game the Bucks should have won, which is why when it ended and it was the Pacers on top, it was just like a gut punch.
I don't know about you. I don't have any appetite to discuss the post-game fracas between Giannis and John Haliburton, or Giannis and Benedict Mathurin. I think as it was unfolding, Dave Kane, I think, put it best too, when you were just seeing everything that was happening, and it was just kind of as he said, guys, it's time to move on. Just get off the floor. It's time to move on. I get it. We hate the Pacers. It's even more frustrating. I'm not going to defend what John Haliburton did. I think it was incredibly clownish and classless. And look, as much as Bucks fans hate Tyrese Haliburton, what he said about Damian Lillard after game 4 and the way that he handled that and addressed, look, my dad wasn't in the right, and I'm going to reach out to Giannis and talk with him to make things right. That's what you need to hear. And I think it's easy to hate Tyrese-Haliburton, the player, and we can talk about whether or not he's a front runner, but Tyrese-Haliburton seems like a good guy with those moments as well of the way he handled those situations. So that's all I have in me to talk about what we saw between Giannis and Haliburton's dad, but we're aligned on the biggest moment. To me, it was the Nembhard 3, because if he misses that shot and you get the rebound, Pacers fold it up and just say, okay, we're going to Milwaukee for game 6, but he makes it. And then it's okay, not over yet. It's a 2-possession game. Let's see what we can do here. And the thing about fatigue, Camille, is all of us have experienced, is it's not just a physical team. Yeah. It's mental that it starts to seep in there as well. And I think that's what we saw from this group. You mentioned the minutes. Giannis and Bobby Portis were the guys that played the fewest minutes at 44 apiece. Gary Trent Jr., 48 minutes. That's the most minutes played in a playoff game by any player so far in this postseason. As you were up 7 with 40 seconds left, every single one of us thought the Bucks are winning this game, and they're bringing it back to Milwaukee for a game number 6. And as you pointed out, you get 2 days off that you're already kind of starting to do you get 2 days off to rest, and then you're going to have the home crowd. And man, I can't believe, I feel pretty good that they're going to force a game 7 in this series. Now, game 7, I never had confidence. Once they fell down 3-1, I never had confidence they're going to win this series, because how much things were stacked against you with no Damian Lillard. And look, let's say those last 40 seconds don't happen. You win the game, you bring it back to Milwaukee, you get 2 days of rest for a team that has to, as we'll get to in our next segment, is very thin. You win that game and you force a game 7 back in Indy. I wouldn't have felt great about a game 7 because of the fatigue factor and the fact that you're talking about a Friday night to probably early Sunday afternoon turnaround, losing an hour going to Indy, and you're the team that's basically, from what we saw, you got 5 guys that you can play. That would be a major advantage, Pacers. Having said all of that, I would still much rather lose game 7 than lose the way that the Bucks lost.
I would too, and I would also take the way the Bucks lost over the way the Miami Heat lost. That was one thing that I brought up of like, which is worse? Would you rather see your team to get completely smoked, or would you rather have the heartbreak at the end? And from the comments I did see from Locked On listeners, it was, give me the 1-point loss. Let me see my team have some fight at the very least. I'll deal with the pain that comes from that, but like, let me see the fight. And I mentioned after game 4, that was the first time I felt like the Bucks really didn't have that fight in them, but a little bit understandable when you see your teammate go down the way that Damian Lillard did. You felt the energy leave the arena. You felt it from the fans, from the team. So like, it was a bit understandable how that can happen. In game 5, there's no moral victories here. Like, you want to keep playing, but at least the 5 guys that started that game, the effort that they put in, the way they went to war, the way they battled, even with the high minute load, it showed me a lot. And I mentioned it on yesterday's show of, I think you have just seen who you need to try to highlight and bringing back this offseason on this team. If you're moving forward with Giannis at the helm, which I think is the best course of action, I think you saw that, Gary Trent Jr. and Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent, who's a free agent this offseason, and Kevin Porter Jr. has the player option. You want to try to find a way to get those 2 back in a Milwaukee Bucks jersey. You have AJ Green under contract. Bobby Portis has the player option. But those 4 guys, like, you saw something working there. And with Giannis's post-game comments as well about how he feels he can have the ball in his hands and succeed. I think you're seeing a way forward for how this team needs to be built going forward.
Yeah, it's we're completely aligned. I would much rather lose the way they did last night than just completely quit. And that with that, look, it's not to say there's no questions facing this team already in the offseason, but that's the nuclear option. If you lose that way where you just quit and roll over, that's we have to completely blow everything up with this team. And that was not the case. So you respect the fight you saw. Ultimately, it wasn't your time. It wasn't your year. And unfortunately, it comes 2 years in a row against a team there is no love lost with. Some other thoughts on the minutes played, and you mentioned the last 2-minute report, the takeaways from that. And to me, there's one other takeaway that I have from this series, and the piling on that we've seen directed at one person specifically on the sidelines. I do want to get into that conversation and what could have changed, if anything, based on what we saw in game number 5. So Camille and I will break that down coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your paired controller, subscribe, or sign in to Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to go. Dive into hundreds of premium titles, including EA Sports College Football 25, Call of Duty, and more as easily as you stream your favorite shows. What if you could jump into your favorite Xbox titles without needing your console in every room? Take it on the go with you. If you're traveling, take that Fire TV 4K stick and just plug it in. If you've already got a console, the Fire TV Stick 4K device is more affordable and easier to travel with for you and your kids wherever you plug things in. And did you ever try to find yourself flipping between apps to find one place that just works? With the Fire TV Stick 4K, everything is in one place, from Netflix to YouTube and beyond. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K, Fire TV Stick 4K Max, and Fire TV Cube. All right, Camille. The big point of contention for a lot of Bucks fans this season, and especially in this playoff series. Any guesses on what that was or who that was that drew the ire of Bucks fans? I know I am probably going to be criticized for it here too, but I draw the criticisms of, well, you're just a company guy and sticking up for the team because of your job. And look, a part of that is probably true, where there's only so much that I can say. But I'm at least being honest with you there. Here's where I left that game, though. That starting lineup. And at first I was like, hey, you don't need a wholesale change. We talked about basically starting that lineup a couple of games into the series. When you remove yourself from it, you look back, yeah, that's the starting lineup you probably should have made the adjustment to, at the very least, game 3 of this series, probably game 2. You still played those guys the most minutes, and those were still the guys that closed the series for you. But yes, there's no argument here. That's the group you should have been starting to at least not put yourself in a hole throughout the course of this series. Having said that, Camille, if that's who you start every game this series, I still don't think it matters. I still don't think you win this series because of what we said in that first segment is, okay, but as this series advanced, you saw we have 5.5, 6 players that you can really trust to play in this series. And it's just a matter of time. And it felt like watching that in the third quarter, like, this feels like this team's running out of gas. Like when you would watch football games and you're watching the clock and like, you're up 2 scores. This is a good offense. Like, just run out the clock. It felt like that's what the Bucks were having to do of, okay, can we buy any time here with this guy off the floor or that guy off the floor? Because Indiana is now starting to recover from their slow starts, and you just look like you're gassed. And to me, that's the biggest thing is, again, you won't get an argument from me. That should have been your starting lineup. Mm-hmm. It doesn't change the course of this series. Maybe you lose in 6 games, maybe you lose in 7 games, but you just did not have the horses, and you would have run out of gas eventually and still lost this series.
Yeah, I mean, I think running out of gas is a valid point to make. You could see it in this game, as we mentioned, like the way that the Bucks started the first quarter with their defensive intensity, how they were pressuring the ball, getting up in the guys. As the game went on, you saw that wane a bit. I mean, by that point too, the Pacers kind of woke up and went, we doing that? Bet. Like we can play this way too. So like the intensity amped up on both sides, and as the game goes on, you wear down. But I think that the crime of not moving to that starting lineup quicker was just that you didn't give yourself the best chance to compete throughout the series. And who knows, it might not have been enough, because as we have seen as the series went on, you really have 5, maybe 6 guys you really wanted to be on the court at any given time. 7 maybe if Dame was healthy here, but that's all you had. So it's like I mentioned earlier with the starting lineup conversation when we were debating should they make a change, I just said it would be nice to not start in a hole. Like if you can at least start the game where it's an even playing field, then you try to live with what happens in those other bench moments when you have to bring in some of those other guys you don't trust as much. But I think, again, it showed a couple questions I didn't even know I had, which was like, hey, who are the 16, game guys, players on this team? And they started kind of revealing themselves as it went on. But again, different series call for different things. I will continue to say I think Brook Lopez had a good season. I think that he was useful throughout the season. And I think that if the Bucks found a way to get out of the first round and match up against Cleveland, Brook Lopez would have been very important in that series. But in this one against the Pacers, like not a fit for him at all. So it's that question of, we like this team. We like some of the pieces that we had. I like the Bucks had more versatility this year than they had last year, but they still didn't have enough depth on this team to really roll with what the Pacers had going, a team that, again, returned pretty much their entire team from the prior year, very stout in their rotations, trustworthy in who they were putting out there on the floor. So they had a few more cards to play than the Bucks did, but I just wish the Bucks would have at least given themselves a better chance to compete throughout the series by making the switch a little bit earlier.
Yeah. And look, I'll say this too, not to backtrack, but play devil's advocate with myself. We mentioned the 2 days off between game 5 and 6, if it would have happened, but you had 3 of those stretches in this series. So yeah, if that's what you lean into and say these guys are not only starting, but these guys are playing 40 minutes and we're leaning into this, you had more rest earlier in the series, that maybe that is enough for you to recover. But I just think eventually you run out of gas because of what you have. And, as much as we both love Brook Lopez, and I would agree, I think he had a very good season again, but it's just the way the league has continued to change that he's not a 30-minute-a-game player anymore. Right. And you need that versatility alongside Giannis. And, we saw, I think that's the best thing to come from this series is we saw how you have to lean in and what works, assuming you get most of this group back. And it's obviously the biggest name, the most important one, but this is the model that we have to play with go forward. I honestly I don't know what Brook's impact would have been in the series against Cleveland either. I get they have the size, but I think you would have run into a lot of problems with Brook playing a drop against that Cavs team and what they do with some of their guards. So this may have been maybe we can play him against Boston. Maybe if the Knicks beat them, we could play him against them. But it's mostly the shame of it is Western Conference teams that Brook Lopez would work best for you than those Eastern Conference teams. Some of the comments from Doc after the game too about the big one. You mentioned what he said about Nembhard's 3. He said it was the single biggest play of the game. It gave them hope. And then we had a defensive mistake on that one. It was tough because our guys fought their butts off. We rode those guys hard, but there was a defensive breakdown on that Nembhard open 3, and it gave them hope and kept them in the series. And then we just made those mental mistakes. Talked about injuries too. There's nothing you can do about those. It's 3 years in a row. It's part of what it is. It's unfortunate, and I would have loved to see this team at full strength, but that just wasn't in the cards this year for us. What was in the cards for us was we found a lot of players through the year because of the adversity that we had. AJ, Gary Trent Jr., Bobby played heavy minutes at the 5, Jericho, Scoot, all those guys. And Doc himself said, Kuz, he did not have a great series, but Kuz will help us go forward. And I would add, he did not have a good series, not a great series. But that you just got to the point where the 5 guys you started, Jericho Sims and Kyle Kuzma, those were the only guys you really felt comfortable to some extent with Kuz. Like, you need that athleticism. And I thought the way that they played him, that honestly is the bigger, to me, you should have done this earlier. Even more so than Brook Lopez was, like, allow him, especially early, find him opportunities to be the energy guy that's coming in off the bench and attack the second unit for the Indiana Pacers.
Yeah, kind of like we've had the conversation before of like what this is going to sound not the way I intended to sound. So I'm going to try to explain it after I say the first way it came to mind, which is, what is he good at on offense? Where is the best spot to put Kyle Kuzma to try to ensure his success? That is the number one question. What actions do we need to run for you? Where do you like to get your shots? Where are your most efficient shots at? How can we try to put you in the best position to succeed? And from what we've seen post-trade deadline up until this final game here, it seems like Kuz kind of has to play in like a Giannis light role, quote unquote, so to speak, where he's going to be the guy who's on the cuts, put the ball in his hands a little bit, let him kind of figure out what he wants to do and how he wants to dictate the game, because you don't really want him shooting the pull-up jumpers, the off-movement jumpers, things like that. You want to try to get him a straight line to the basket if possible, have him finish around the rim. And even at times when he got to the rim, it could be an adventure at times of what the finish looked like for him. So just really trying to figure out, I think, for the Bucks this offseason is, how do you put him in the most successful position to succeed going forward? And that's a question the Bucks are going to have to grapple with. I know his name is going to be brought up a lot over the summer based on his contract of somebody like, hey, trade chip. But again, the value has to be there. And you might just end up in a situation where Kuz is back on the roster next season to see if you can play through it and see what happens at the trade deadline the following year. But I think for Kuzma, again, I was surprised throughout the season with the defense that he had, just the ability that he had there. He had a better playmaking touch than I expected. It's just really figuring out how to best unlock him, I think, going forward.
All right. And it brings us to the biggest question facing this team here, or questions, I should say, but there's obviously one that looms very, very large. I know it's probably a landscape you want to avoid for the next couple of weeks here if you're a Bucks fan in terms of this national discourse surrounding this team. So we'll open up that question and take a look back at that other development we heard in that last 2-minute report. We'll get to that coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. So the last 2-minute reports came out. Did we mention this in the first segment? Regardless, briefly. Yeah, the league saying, "Yep, the 3-point play on Haliburton, that wasn't a foul on AJ Green." No bleep, right? But again, okay. So just the way things were going and the minute totals we talked about, if that foul isn't called, you're prolonging the inevitable, and you probably end up losing in double overtime because of what you're up against. I mean, do you disagree with that?
I mean, you could, or you could have escaped, because it's an extra point there. You lost by one. But to your point, it could be double overtime, and then it's another level of fatigue.
And then we're talking about Gary Trent Jr. playing 53 minutes.
Right. That could have been the case there. It's like you don't know. And I think the part that drives me crazy, I won't say all fans, but the part that drives me crazy about the 2-minute report a lot of the time is like, what does this change?
Right. What's the point?
Yeah, like we're not going to go back and replay this. So even like, especially like the Pistons, Knicks was a game 4 or 5 for them when it was the foul on Hardaway, where game that 4. Was like, what are we going to do? Like, they didn't even let him go, okay, you know what? We were wrong. You can come back on here and shoot some free throws and we'll change it. Like, you're not doing that. So 2-minute reports to me have always just been just a source of frustration as a Bucks fan, as a Packers fan. It doesn't matter if the call was right or wrong, because you're not going to do anything about it. So it's just kind of like adding insult to injury a little bit of like, all right, fine, whatever. It is what it is.
I mean, I got to ask, has every pro team in Wisconsin, their stadiums and arenas, are they all built on Native American burial grounds? Like what's going on here that it's just one thing after another?
Something. I had one of my comments just saying, like, I feel like we Wisconsin fans have the worst sports luck. And I was like, I know it feels that way, but I mean,
there's a lot of bad, but it's certainly up there. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, only one team walks away champion every year in whatever sport, whatever league. So there are going to be 29, 30, however many teams are in your league disappointed at the outcome of that season. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's a tough way to go out. I'm still sitting here and it's been a day.
You're getting more
that
angry
game
now. I just remembered that.
Yeah.
97% of teams in this league are disappointed every year because
Mm-hmm.
only one can win. And look, the tough part is, what does this mean for the future of this team?
Yeah.
The reality is this era is probably over now, and we'll see what happens with your best player. And John Horst has pulled some miracles in the past, so we'll see. But you are probably exiting this series against the Pacers knowing this is the last playoffs we entered with any form of expectations for maybe quite some time now, because of the makeup of this group. You got a lot of free agents and decisions to make. And as we both said, we are both among the biggest Brook Lopez supporters, but I think the last couple of weeks in this playoffs basically forced the decision on you of it's time to move on and move to a clean break here. You have bird rights on Jericho Sims, so you can retain him. Frank and I caught a lot of heat for this, and I don't think we saw anything in the playoffs to change our minds on that. It's not a huge payday that Kevin Porter Jr. is going to be in line for. I don't think you're talking about the mid-level exception even for him. He's going to be in for a raise, assuming he opts out of that deal. But I think there's an appetite on both sides, and especially hearing what Giannis said about the makeup of this group, that depends on, let's assume Giannis is still on this group, which is the reality that I want to live in. But I feel pretty strongly that you can and will retain Kevin Porter Jr. Taurean Prince is a free agent. I think that's probably the same boat as Brook Lopez of thank you for your service during the regular season. And I mean, unless you want a second veteran minimum, we've kind of seen the direction we need to go. Gary Trent Jr. Certainly the playoffs. I mean, that's what a lot of Bucks fans anticipated from Kevin Porter Jr. If he's going to have a great playoffs and then he's in line for a big raise. That was Gary Trent Jr. Now, how big is that raise? I don't think it's a mid-level exception type of, $14 million. Maybe it's a Malik Beasley type deal where you double the vet minimum and then you use parts of a mid-level exception to retain him. You can and should extend AJ Green in the offseason. Ryan Rollins, we didn't even talk about, but he's going to be a restricted free agent with no Dame Lillard, we think, all of next season. Yeah, I mean, you need Kevin Porter Jr. first and foremost, but Ryan Rollins is equally important now to have that depth. And that was one of the more perplexing things, too, of why didn't we see Ryan Rollins in Game 5 of this series? But who knows? And then Bobby Portis's decision, too. Like, can you get some type of deal with Bobby Portis where, all right, opt out and we'll pay to keep you once again? Or is there just much more money out there on the open market for Bobby Portis? And speaking of, I mean, that's the other thing with Gary Trent. He's 26 years old.
Yeah, he's young.
Granted, you were in a much different spot when BP did this, but I could see a scenario where Gary Trent Jr. does you the solid like Bobby Portis did, 4 years ago? And all right, we'll pay you the 120% that we can. And it's kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We will take care of you next year when we get your early bird rights and we can go above and beyond and pay you more. So look, there are ways to keep a lot of this group together and your most important and youngest and most athletic pieces. The challenge is there's no other way to supplement. You don't control your first round picks until 2030 is the first pick you could trade. And there's just nothing in terms of sweeteners. If you're looking at getting off of contracts and like, well, you could move this guy and do this, you got nothing to add to that. So it's going to be a best case scenario. We keep those names under those scenarios, and we'll get into this in much more detail with Frank in the offseason. But outside of that, you're back to rounding out the roster with veteran minimum type of deals. And look, that's the other thing that we've seen is just how much the roster atrophied after the championship season with trades, with age, with injuries. And you get to a point where you are relying on guys that are veteran minimum contracts. and they're veteran minimum contracts for a reason. Now, I think Gary Trent Jr. is the one that you would say, man, why was this guy on a vet minimum? But the rest of them, you see throughout the course of a season and in a playoff series what the flaws are and why they were at that level.
Yeah, and I think that the point about the mid-level exception, like I was wondering, like I think they could probably split that between Gary and Kevin Porter Jr. if need be to find the money to keep the two of them. Bobby Portis with the player option is really interesting to me about what he does this offseason. But a lot of the conversation around this team too, and for a good reason, has been just how old and slow this Milwaukee Bucks team has been. Trade deadline happens, it infuses some youth, and just honestly, from the course of the season, the rotation had an infusion of youth with the guys that were playing the heavy minutes there. Like you look at Giannis, who's 30, Dame 34, turning 35, I think in July of this year. So like, yeah, they're older. Brook Lopez was 37. Yes, understood, but Giannis 30. Bobby 30, and of the 5 dudes who played in that starting lineup yesterday, those are the 2 oldest players in that lineup, because AJ Green is still 25, Gary Trent Jr. is 26, Kevin Porter Jr. is 24. You got Ryan Rollins, who didn't play but could be part of the team, who's 22. Tyler Smith is 20. Like
that's another name we didn't mention. His development's going to be important. You see, he's got an NBA ready shot.
Super important. So like there are some young, interesting pieces that already are on the roster or could remain on the roster going forward. So when thinking about what else you need for this team, I think we mentioned it last offseason of like, can you find your next Pat Connaughton? Like the young player who you kind of need to develop a little bit, but you see the outlines of how they can be a useful role player for your team. And we're going to have so much time, Justin, to really break down the roster, the moves they should make. But like, again, high priority, the guys who started in game 5 last night, I would love to see them all back in Milwaukee Bucks jersey next season.
Kevin Porter Jr. is 24. Andre Jackson Jr. is 23. Ryan Rollins, as you mentioned, 22. Tyler Smith is 20. Gary Trent is 26. Jericho Sims is 26. Bobby Portis is younger than Giannis. He and Kyle Kuzma are both 29. So there is a scenario where everything falls into place for us and you keep that group together. And all of a sudden you're talking about, wow, Giannis is the oldest player on this team, save for, Damian Lillard, who I don't think we can or should expect to play next season. It's just a matter of, okay, what about the guys behind them? And what's the rest of the depth that you're rounding out? Because as we saw in this series, you feel pretty good about that group. You can't beat a team with just 5 guys, unless that's 5 prime LeBrons on your team, you're not winning that series. So that's the big thing facing this team. And I think it is a big one to keep an eye on the AJ Green part too, because you can extend him. It's a non-guaranteed deal that he's got. It's at the very least going to be guaranteed, but there is a market for AJ Green with playable defense and shooting. He's in line for a big payday if he hits the market. So you got to work out an extension with him now and keep him. And, that's the last thing to me to point to. You can buy draft picks too. Now you can't do it until I think after July 1st because of the amount of money they have available. But now that you're out of the second apron, you can buy draft picks. And that's why you just go back to the Chris Middleton trade. And I know you and I have talked about this and the kind of internal debate of, do you feel like, I don't know, did we owe it to him to keep this group for one last run and see, can health converge and you get these guys in the playoffs here? But ultimately, I mean, if we're doing this 4 years in a row and saying, no, this is the year we're going to be healthy, I think number one, you kind of have your answer there. And it was clear the organization had no more trust that Chris Middleton could be healthy in the playoffs. I know the Wizards are playing for draft picks, but under the radar, the Wizards shut him down with a knee issue at the end of the season. And look, the other part is all those names we mentioned and the fact that, look, it depends on if those guys say, all right, if Giannis is still here, I will play with this because I like that group that we had. That's the biggest piece. You could not do any of that if you didn't make this trade. You could have, you could have still done the DeLon Wright for Jericho Sims. You could have still, and probably would have, still done Marjan Beauchamp for Kevin Porter Jr. But the Kyle Kuzma and Chris Middleton part, that's what got you under the second apron. And without that, you don't have that mid-level exception to break up and say, okay, here's how we keep Gary Trent Jr. and here's how we keep Kevin Porter Jr. and do some other things. So it ultimately was the move they needed to make, because if you don't make that and you lose this series in 5 and you're faced with even more bleakness. It's not pretty as is, but if you're faced with, well, we still got a year of Chris and we're still a second apron team, that's when it starts to get pretty dark pretty early, where other guys look around, not just the Giannis discourse, but maybe Bobby Portis too. Like, I don't know, can this team compete at that level? I should probably take money elsewhere. And that's where you quickly move towards, wow, so we're the Utah Jazz.
I was going to say this, and this will be my last thought on the episode, because if you are that route, you don't want to end up being the Phoenix Suns, where you have such an expensive payroll, you're over the second apron, and you didn't even make the playoff. Like, how do you pivot out of this with the cap restrictions that you now have under this new CBA, being a team that's above that second apron? So if anything good did come out of the Chris Middleton trade, it is having that flexibility this offseason to kind of maneuver a little bit with more flexibility, because right now you don't want to be where Phoenix is and you don't want to be where Utah is, although they have the draft picks. But another conversation for another day. But yeah, that getting under the second apron was a big deal for this team.
Yeah, I mean, Jericho Sims and Kevin Porter Jr. are the flowers that grew out of the concrete in that Chris Middleton trade for this group, but still a lot to break down over the offseason here. We are planning on having a 3-person pod for tomorrow's show to get Frank to share his thoughts on the end to the season and the offseason ahead for the Bucks as well. So look for that in your Friday feed. But the season, look, it comes to an end for the Bucks now. It's another disappointing exit for this group, but doesn't mean we're going away, Camille. We still got the whole offseason to dig through what I would expect to be a very busy and incredibly impactful offseason for this group. So you're not losing us yet on this show.
Nah, we're going to be here, so make sure y'all keep coming back too. Like, we got some things to work through, Bucks fans, and we're going to work through it together throughout the offseason.
Well, that'll do it for today's show. Again, we'll have more thoughts on the end of the season overall, the cap situations with Frank Madden on tomorrow's show. For Camille, I'm Justin, thanking you guys for tuning in once again. We'll talk with you tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.